Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for the Q&As. And like I've been doing lately, I'm going to break these up into two parts so that they're easier for people to digest, and the questions will be posted below for you guys with timestamps for those interested. All right, first question. Can you miss out on noob gains? As in, suppose I train stupidly and I don't eat to support growth for 2 years. Have I missed my opportunity to make awesome linear progress? Honestly, it really depends on who you ask. I'm going to get to my experience in a bit, but if you guys remember when I interviewed CJ Allen, who was at the time working on his PhD in biomechanics and is himself a competitive athlete and strength coach, he said that in his opinion, yes, you do miss out on new games. That you basically, from the time you start actually training with weights, was somewhat hard, meaning not just playing around and just throwing a little bit of lightweight around or some curls, but you actually come in and start doing a few heavy compound movements and things, and you run it for a somewhat continuous training process that you have basically a 6-month window, 9 months at the most. And if you fail to train hard enough to hit your linear gains, that's it. You missed them. You don't get them back again. You go to basically being a late novice, and you go to those sort of progression rates. The sort of progression rates that people go to on my novice program around the 9th to 10 month mark is pretty much where you're going to be, even if you didn't gain the strength and you didn't gain the muscle mass. Now, that was his opinion as someone working on an advanced degree in the field. I don't know that he's right, and I respect his knowledge, but in my experience, I've seen guys who goofed off for a year or two in the gym, still barely looked like they lift, had only gained 5 or 6 pounds of muscle, who have gone on my novice program and put 10 pounds of muscle on in that 1 year, and then they stalled out and go to being a true intermediate. There have been people who reported that to me, and I've seen people do that a bit. So based upon what people are reporting to me, primarily who run some of my programs, it seems like they can go ahead and get their noob gains as long as they didn't push things out too far. Meaning if you've already gained, say, 10 pounds of muscle over 2 years, kind of goofing off a bit, and only 5 pounds your first year and second, instead of like 15 like you should be gaining your first year, yeah, those people do seem to go ahead and get their noob gains in my experience. So I think it depends on how long you pushed it out and if you made any decent gains at all. But essentially, yeah, once you've gained 10 pounds of muscle, once you've gained maybe 15 pounds of muscle, no matter how many years it took you to make it, you're done with your regular linear progress. You're not going to see it again. It's over. You got to just deal with that. But by that same token, you did make your noob gains. It just took you 2 years to make your noob gains instead of 6 to 9 months. And I think that's an important difference people need to realize. You still made them. You just took a lot longer. And people who get all of their noob gains early on are going to reach closer to that point of diminished returns where you don't see any noticeable muscle gain year to year. They're going to get there faster because they exhausted it quicker. But for a lot of guys, that's what they want. They want to gain that fast muscle as quick as they can and get to a point to where they start stalling with their natural gains, and it just starts getting really slow because they've already pretty much made 95% of their lifetime gains that way in their first 2 to 3 years. And that's what a lot of guys want. They want to get there quick. But other guys are more content with a slower journey as long as they eventually get there. If it takes them 4 years to get to where they could have been in 2 or 3, they're okay with that. But ultimately, to answer your question, I guess it depends on how far you progress goofing off before you jump over and try it. And the thing that you need to remember also when you do that, certain body parts, if they got completely neglected, in my experience, guys who didn't train their legs at all, who jump in and start doing a novice type squat program and deadlift program, they do tend to make really rapid linear progress for at least a few months. All right, next question. Last year, I had a laparoscopic inaugural hernia surgery as a result of ego lifting on the squat. I spent 3 months recovering and I lost a lot of size and strength. I then slowly began to lift as recommended by my physician. I spent 8 months on a bulk whilst for the most part ignoring my leg development. I regret doing that, but I was terrified to squat again. I have now been on a cut, minus 500 calories for 10 weeks, and I've started to squat again using box squats. I've been making gradual progress in my leg development, but stalled on upper. Assuming I can bench 225 for reps, but only deadlift 245 for 5x5 and squat even less, is it possible to gain muscle only on previously neglected areas on a moderate cut? Thanks. Keep up the great content. All right. In my experience, if you completely neglected the squat, didn't squat at all, and mostly neglected your lower body other than a little bit of deadlifting, yeah, you're going to jump in. Kind of going back to that previous question, this one was a great question to segue into this one with, because the other question answered it mostly for you. Because those areas completely detrained from wherever you're at, you got injured ego lifting and you completely detrained and restarted. I think that you're going to be able to see noob-like gains for at least 3 or 4 months. You might be able to push it out to 5 or 6, but I would say you're going to have at least a 3 to 4 month window where you're going to be able to make really fantastic gains on those big, heavy compounds that work the full body with a focus on the lower body, like the squat and the deadlift. They're going to come along really fast. What I would recommend, obviously, with a previous injury, there's no reason to go 100%. You can go ahead and nurse it a little bit, work on technique, work on form, and make sure that your core is really, really strong before you get into it. So again, lots of standing band crunches, weighted planks, things like that. Strengthen your core up and focus on your technique as someone who's previously had a hernia like that from ego lifting. But yeah, I think that you'll have at least a 3 to 4 month window to where you'll be able to jump in and make fantastic gains, like basically noob gains off of your squat. So jump in and do it. All right, next question. Why is it when I feel I can't lift the weights and someone either records me or is near my vicinity, I suddenly can lift the weights? Is there a way I can fix this? Because I don't want to be struggling with my lifts when the gym is empty. The reason this happens is because you're the type of person, or your personality type is one to where you want to show off or impress other people. You're probably a somewhat outgoing person. You like to be the center of attention, and accordingly, when you know there's attention on you because you like to be the center of attention, you go harder, you perform 100%, you're more motivated. And so your concern could be, well, if there's no one in the gym, am I still going to go as hard? Maybe not. What you're going to have to do, you're going to have to find a different type of motivation for yourself when there's no one around. You're going to have to focus on either anger or your goals harder. You're going to have to find something to drive you to be successful when there's no one there, because yeah, that's just your personality type. And I'm really not sure what the cure is for that, other than just to say, well, if you like doing this to impress other people, I wouldn't worry about it then. So what if you perform a little less if there's no one around? It's not like you're not still going to grow from it. And that's something people don't understand either. You don't have to go 100% every single workout or every lift to make progress off of it, to get bigger, to get stronger. So that's something people need to understand also. It goes back to what I talk about. You train to gain strength, not to demonstrate strength. You can demonstrate strength when there's a competitive environment around. And for you, that you're the type of person that people watching you might actually treat it like a competitive environment. So no big deal though, so what if you can do 1 or 2 less reps or 5 less pounds when no one's watching? It's still challenging you, and as long as you're seeing progression on it and progressive overload, it doesn't matter that you're not hyped up to go harder, because actually what ends up happening when you're hyped up to go harder like that, sometimes it also takes you longer to recover due to peripheral nervous system fatigue and being psyched up and amped up. So just something to consider there also. I wouldn't worry about it a whole lot though. Just get in and do your thing, and if you feel you need extra motivation, if no one's going to be in the gym, a little extra coffee and a little more psyching yourself out and visualizing before you lift the weight should do the job. All right, next question. I'm thinking of doing your intermediate program, but when the time comes, how would one diet down, especially when the lifts start to stall when getting deep into a cut? How would I adjust the sets, reps? I want to maintain as much strength as possible. All right, what you need to accept is that any actual program is intended to put muscle and or strength on you. That is the reason you have an actual program. It's there for progression. If you're an intermediate or higher lifter and you are cutting, that means losing body fat, losing weight, you're not going to make progress. So you don't need to be running programs at all. Don't run my intermediate program during your cut. You're going to need to probably just pick whatever block you were in and stick with that, or you're going to need to actually reduce the weights as you go. If you try to run the progression pattern of the program, you're going to not be able to increase the weight. You're probably going to need to reduce the weight slightly as you go, or don't add the actual other blocks and sets and everything in. Just keep the blocks stagnant so that you don't try to progress, and maybe be less aggressive with the weight increases from block to block in the periodization. But you need to accept that fact. If you're an intermediate and you are cutting and losing body weight, you're not going to gain strength. And if you can even keep the strength that you have, consider that an amazing success. So don't worry about it. Don't run an actual program with progression. You're going to need to cut the progression out of any program you use, and you're basically just using a program for exercises, reps, and sets, not using the actual real program, because a program includes a progression pattern, and that progression pattern pretty much goes in the garbage the moment you start losing weight. That's just the real world. Unless you're on tons of trenbolone or something, you just have to accept that. All right, next question. Hey Jason, if an intermediate lifter decided to blast, would hopping on your full body novice program be a good idea since you will have better recovery and strength gains? If yes, would you recommend adding accessories to develop lagging body parts? If no, what program would you recommend, assuming one's goal is power building? Galasius J. No, I think even if someone is blasting, and for those who don't know what he means using a bunch of gear. I've been asked this before, and honestly, I feel my novice program for someone doing what you're describing could actually have a higher chance of injury. That program is for a novice. It is extremely aggressive, and the workloads and progression that I am ascribing there, even for someone throwing a modest amount of drugs into the mix, could end up getting them hurt, because you tend to gain strength really quick, and not always connective tissue strength to go with the workload depending on what you're using. So no, I wouldn't recommend that at all. What I would recommend for a true intermediate who is doing what you're doing, go ahead and just run my normal intermediate off-season athlete program. I wrote that program with the intention that it could be run by people who are both clean and people who are using moderate amounts of anabolics. So I wrote it with the intention that both groups of people could get away with it, because it's very sound, proven programming, and it's just that the people who are on something are just going to excel at it easier. They're going to have an easier time with the program. They're not going to find it quite as taxing, but they're going to still make double the progress that the natural guy is going to make on it. That's just the reality of it. But I absolutely wrote that program for both groups of people because I felt like it could work for both. So give that a go instead. But the novice program, if you're in a true intermediate already, you might hurt yourself with what you're doing. All right, next question and last question in part 1. Do women's breasts get smaller as they gain muscle, or is this purely from fat loss? I'm asking this because my girlfriend has breasts with decent size despite being relatively thin, so she doesn't need any fat loss at all. But it would be nice if she made some gains. She's, however, afraid that her boobs will get smaller. I'm kind of am too, LOL. All right, I can totally relate to this, having just worked with my girlfriend for the last year for her transformation, which a lot of you guys have noticed on camera, and I've even done some comparisons. Brittany has lost 40 pounds, but she also went from a double D down to a C cup. So I definitely understand the concerns here. The only way this is going to be avoided is for her to basically avoid any serious fat loss, because that is actually what causes women's boobs to get bigger or smaller, is fat gain or fat loss, because they're mostly fatty tissue. So if you're losing fat all over your body, you're going to lose boob size. If you're gaining fat all over your body, you're going to gain boob size. So what she's going to need to do is avoid losing weight. And that might sound easy enough, but when you start putting a woman on a very serious weight training program, they start losing body fat really easily. So what you'll need to do is monitor her body weight. If you put her on a good program, such as any of my programs, and then have her slowly gain body weight. And what I mean is, as long as the scale isn't going down and the scale is going up half a pound or 1 pound every month, somewhere in that range. So if, say, you said she's thin, let's say she's 130 pounds right now. At the end of the first month, maybe you want her to be at 131. At the end of the second month, you want her to be 132. Make sure that she is gaining muscle weight without losing the body fat she already has. Because if she stays at the 130 for, say, 3 months of a novice program or 6 months of one, she will probably have gained a pound of muscle every month or close to. So she might have gained 5 or 6 pounds of muscle in that 6 months. And if her weight stays the same, she's lost 5 or 6 pounds of body fat. And 5 to 6 pounds of body fat will fill up 3/4 of a 1 gallon jug. So that's how much fat she's going to lose on her body. Some of that's going to come from her boobs. So if that's a concern, you absolutely need to make sure that she is not losing body weight, and make sure that she's gaining body weight at the normal rate of muscle gain, so that her body fat is basically going to stay the same. She's going to look leaner either way, though. That's the thing you need to realize, is that if your body fat percentage isn't increasing and someone is gaining muscle at a serious rate, such as noob gains, they are generally going to look like they've lost a little bit of body fat because their actual fat gets dispersed a little bit over the muscle tissue. So it makes the fat itself look slightly thinner. And since the muscles are fuller, she's going to look more defined. She's going to look more toned, would be the word women always use. She's going to look more toned. So people are going to assume she lost a little fat, but she won't have. But definitely a nice, slow, steady weight gain. Again, up to a pound a month, half a pound to a pound a month. And that should ensure that she keeps her boobs. But if she starts losing any weight while she's progressing on a serious program, her boobs will slowly start to shrink. It might not be noticeable at first, but it'll get there over time. But keep in mind, it took 40 pounds of fat loss for my girlfriend to go from double D down to a C cup. But that is purely fat loss that causes that. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2 coming up here in a bit. Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. First question. Do you think that in starting strength program you must be over 500 calorie surplus to progress for a long amount of time, or you can be in a 500 cal surplus and progress for a long amount of time? People been saying that you must be at 1,000 cal surplus to succeed during the program. All right, this is one of those to where I disagree with Mark Ripto. He's trying to get guys as big and as strong as possible, as quick as possible, and he doesn't care if you gain 20, 25, 30 pounds of body fat doing so. You have to remember, starting strength was written for high school football players, okay? It was not written for other people, and if you follow his nutritional advice, he's just trying to get you ready to be a lineman to play against other 16 and 17 year olds. So you need to put weight and strength on and muscle, fat, everything as quick as possible. Now, that being said, no, you don't need 1,000 calorie surplus. I think a 500 would be perfectly acceptable, but what you will need to do is realize that if you gain any significant amount of muscle quickly and your workloads go up and you're doing conditioning work on top of it as your conditioning improves, your energy intake is going to go up through the roof. And eventually, it might not be unreasonable that by the end of the program, your TDEE, which is your total daily energy expenditure, is up to 1,000 calories higher than where you started. That's actually pretty common. So what I'm going to say is that go ahead and do a 500 calorie surplus. And you may not even need to count it. Just make sure that you're slowly gaining weight would be my best advice. I think too many guys focus on counting calories instead of simply making sure their portions are big enough for the scale to be going up or down. I think calorie counting for anyone who's not a serious competitive athlete or who needs to have major weight loss going on is probably not the best approach. But if you're going to do the calorie counting, because you probably are doing this because you want to be a serious athlete, 500 calories to start, and then gradually increase that. And what I mean is about every 6 weeks or so, add another 100 calories to whatever you're eating. So if you started at 2,800 calories because your maintenance was around 2,300, 6 weeks in, go ahead and increase it to 29. Another 6 weeks in, go ahead and increase it to 30. And that way you'll stay ahead of the curve as far as stalling, because what will happen is on a 500 calorie surplus before long, pretty quickly actually, probably by the 3rd month, that will become your new maintenance. You're going to stop gaining weight. If you're not gaining weight on that program, you're going to struggle with your lifts. You're going to struggle to make progress. So you're going to need to be gaining weight continually on that program. But the 1,000 calorie a day surplus, you need to understand, is essentially you're going to be gaining a pound of body fat every single week if you do it that way. And around the 5 or 6 month mark, that's going to start getting pretty horrific. As you can imagine, a pound of fat every week, 4 pounds a month, that's 20 to 25 pounds of fat by the time you get to the 5 or 6 month mark, in addition to any muscle that you gain. So I can see how a lot of guys would be concerned about that. So again, you got to keep in mind what the goals are of his program. There's a reason he has guys drinking a gallon of milk a day if they struggle to get in calories of just straight whole milk. All right, next question. Jason, I have trouble breathing during the bent over row, even during the eccentric portion of the pull. Every other movement I can breathe fairly easily. This results in me just holding my breath the entire time. Any advice on how to correct this? This is because your stomach and diaphragm is hitting the top of your thighs. You need to adjust your position on this exercise. You need to go ahead and do just barely a bend in the knee. You don't want to do it straight leg, but it's guys who tend to squat down when they do this exercise, or they have their feet way too close together who run into this trouble breathing. Again, it's because your thighs are hitting your diaphragm and squishing it, and that's what's causing you the problem. So if you manage to keep your upper back flat and not round it over. And you can avoid letting your stomach touch your thighs at any point in the exercise. That will resolve it. Again, quit squatting down. You need to stand up like you're doing a stiff leg deadlift on any type of row, which means no more than a 10 to 15 degree bend in your knee. And if that doesn't fix the problem, because you're not actually seeing any contact happening there between your hip or your thigh with your actual stomach, then you might have another medical issue going on that you might want to go see your doctor about and have them just investigate, explain the situation, explain what I told you and that you changed it and the problem didn't go away. They might want to make sure that you don't have some sort of problem with your lungs, maybe a small puncture or hole in your lung or something going on that they need to investigate. So again, when you see abnormal things like that, that's a good sign that maybe there's a medical issue you might need to address. But I can assure you 90% chance it is because you're standing incorrectly. All right, next question. Thoughts on the 5-3-1 method and using conditioning work such as loaded carries, prowler pushes to help out powerlifting. I read in Greg Knuckles' recent AMA on Reddit, he thinks that powerlifting programs could benefit from loaded carries for just general strength and conditioning. What are your thoughts? All right, brief thoughts on the 5-3-1 itself, because that doesn't seem to be the bulk of your question. I think it works for about 50% of people, and the other half of people it sucks. It works a lot better for guys on drugs than it does for naturals. Just my opinion. And I think that you need to carefully select your accessory work if you're trying to do it drug-free as far as overlapping different muscle groups. But I've done whole videos on that before in the past. I think I've covered that in 3 entire full videos over the years. Now, as to your other question, I agree with Greg Knuckles on this one. I think Greg is right. Greg is right 80% of the time anyways, 80 to 90% in my experience. On this one, he's in that 80 to 90%. He's right. Loaded carries, farmer's walks, sled pulls, prowler pushes, things like that, as long as they're not pushing you into a chronic overreaching position with your lower body, say your quads, glutes, things like that, due to just excessive volume of training, as long as you're adapted to the workload and again, you're not reaching an overtrained state with it, they're perfectly acceptable. I think they're a good way to build overall strength. I think they're a good way to build overall function, and that will help you as any sort of strength athlete. It doesn't matter whether you're a power lifter, strongman, Olympic lifter, football player. Any strength athlete is going to benefit from that sort of heavy conditioning work. So I think it's definitely a good idea, and it's definitely the sort of stuff that you can do at home. If you have a house and everything and a backyard of your own, I mean, stuff like that is stuff you could easily do at home as well, so you don't even have to go to the gym, because most gyms aren't equipped for it, but some are. But yeah, absolutely. It's just called GPP work. It's just general physical preparedness, and I would say 90% of your championship powerlifters around the world actually incorporate GPP regularly into their training. So I think Greg's right on this one. If you want to be a better power lifter, it wouldn't be a bad idea to incorporate some of it into your training as your conditioning work. All right, next question. Hi Jason, what is your opinion on stance width on the squat? The evidence suggests that a wide stance, about 150% of shoulder width, activates the glutes more than normal stance, and the quad activation remains the same. Also, the wide stance feels more natural to me. Will it wear out your hips in the long term when combined with deadlift? All right, honestly, there is no right or wrong answer here. I generally tell guys, though, that if your goals are overall strength and athleticism and you don't plan on performing the squat in competition, in some sort of actual competition, I don't recommend a wide stance at all. I recommend high bar Olympic style squatting, preferably without a belt. I think that is the best for overall athleticism due to the improved range of motion, the deeper stretch you can get on it, all of the above. However, you will oftentimes lift as much as 5% less weight on your heaviest sets and your max is doing it, and losing 5% of the poundages on the bar is not ideal for being a competitive power lifter. So that being said, it depends on what you're going to do with it. And as far as stance width affecting your hips or wearing them out, there is no universal answer. Again, stuff I've covered in the past, I could cover again. It turns out that human hip sockets and joints and angles vary so much within our species that it's mind-boggling. Like, we as a species have such a diverse hip structure development from person to person, even within the same racial and ethnic groups. It doesn't even seem to affect it, meaning even if you take any ethnic group from any part of the world on Earth and you look at their structure, it varies just as much within that group as it does around the globe. So it's not even based upon where your people came from, and I don't fully understand why that is, but it just seems to be the case that we all have very, very different hip structures just from family to family. So your neighbor down the street whose ancestors came from the same country as you might have 10 or 15 degrees difference on his hip structure angle than you do. It's just crazy like that. So accordingly, finding a perfect squat stance that doesn't put the wear or shearing stress or anything on your hip joints personally actually takes a bit of trial and error and trying to look at your own anatomy and seeing how everything rotates. And so finding the perfect width and the perfect toe position for an individual can actually take quite a bit of work in looking at it. And remember, just because it's good for you doesn't mean it's good for your workout partner. And that's an important thing to keep in mind there. It really varies that much, and that can't be understated enough. All right, next question. Hey Jason, what is your opinion on using a trap bar instead of a traditional barbell for deadlift? Does the trap bar have any greater benefit to it in terms of safety, etc., or are they both equal? Thanks. All right, the trap bar is going to vary a bit, but usually you can lift a little more weight with a trap bar if you're using handles that are at the normal position that the barbell would be in and relative to your shin. But if you're using higher handle ones, you're going to be able to lift up to 50, 80, maybe even in some cases 100 pounds more on the trap bar. The thing that you need to realize with the trap bar deadlift, though, is that it is a hybrid exercise that is basically 2/3 deadlift, 1/3 squat. It's just that you're squatting with the weight down below you. It's actually like a half squat combined with a deadlift. And accordingly, it works your thighs a little more than a traditional deadlift, your quads, but it also works your back and particularly your spinal erectors considerably less. So that's the reason a lot of field athletes do it. But the thing I want to stress there is that if you're using that instead of the conventional deadlift with a barbell, you are going to develop your lower back less than you will that way. The conventional deadlift will simply strengthen and develop your lower back more. It will be stronger and more powerful from doing it. However, the lower back tends to recover slowly, and so a lot of field athletes who want most of the benefits of the deadlift, who are going to take a lot of impacts on the field, such as football players, rugby players, any contact sport, they can't deadlift as frequently because their lower back can't be in an unrecovered state all the time when they're out there on the playing field, because it will affect their performance. And so that's why you see so many football players utilizing the trap bar, is because it allows them to get the benefits of the deadlift, the majority of them, without taxing their lower back and spinal erectors as much, so that they can do their other work more frequently without their lower back becoming an issue. So it's really a different exercise, and you need to understand that. And that's kind of the difference. And so I gave you an example of an application as to where it would actually be used successfully. But if you want the most powerful lower back possible, doing the conventional deadlift with a barbell is going to be the better choice. All right, next question. What is your opinion on looking versus not looking in the mirror while doing compound movements? Well, I'll state this. There is a reason mirrors are banned in many of the top athletic and strength gyms in the world. They're absolutely not allowed to be inside the gym or on the walls, and particularly at all. And the reason for that, mirrors hurt you. Looking in the mirror when you're performing compound movements is a good way to injure yourself. It is probably one of the number one causes of injuries because it causes form breakdown. But the worst is when people turn to the side to look at what they're doing in the mirror. That is how people injure their backs on doing rows, on deadlifts, on squats, things like that, is turning to the side to look in the mirror to check their own form or what they're doing. Probably contributes to 70 to 80% of injuries on these exercises, and that is how you actually damage your back. That's, in my experience, the most common way to herniate a disc in your back, is doing that. So mirrors, no, they're off limits. Number two, even watching yourself in the mirror when you squat or deadlift changes your neck position. It forces you to change from a neutral neck or whatever neck position that you started in. It forces you to move your neck up or down to watch yourself in the mirror. And by doing that, you're messing up your alignment of your neck and then messing up the alignment of your back on the exercise, and you can put yourself into a compromising position. So looking in the mirrors when performing any of these big movements is probably the worst thing you can do. And in all honesty, if people were really serious about the safety of their lifters, they would ban them everywhere but the little dumbbell area where everyone does their curls and stuff. They would actually take all the mirrors off from all the other sections of a gym if they were really serious about safety. Just my opinion there. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.